Hi, welcome to another edition of Antique Radio Archaeology. Today we're going to do a restoration on a Montgomery Wards Airline brand mini radio. And this thing was produced in 1940 and it goes by the model number 04BR-511A. Now, I picked this thing up off of eBay about 11 years ago, and I've spent quite a bit of time over the years just intermittently doing a little bit of research on it. And it was tough, and let me tell you why. Because this particular model has a model number that goes right here on this chassis. That's missing, and so is the sticker on the bottom. So what that has done is it's caused me to have to figure out what model I had. Now, this particular radio was produced in 4 different years. In 1940 they produced an 04BR-511A and a 512A. The 511A is the brown bakelite version you see here. The 512A is an ivory version. Later in 1941 they continued producing the same radio, but they changed the model number. Instead of it being an 04BR, it was a 14BR for 1941. And they also had the 511A and B for brown and ivory. No circuit changes, no nothing. It was just a model number change. And that was the beginning of 1941. Towards the middle to end of 1941, they introduced a new version of it. It had a different dial glass, or plastic I should say, on it, which was a little more ornate. It had kind of a gold surround on it, looked really pretty. And inside they actually switched over from the 35 L6 GT output tube to the 50 L6 GT output tube. And when they did that, they also eliminated the filament resistor, because obviously the 50 is going to take a little bit more power, so by eliminating it, they gave the power it needed to function. Obviously, we all know that in 1941 was pretty much the last year they were making a lot of consumer grade radios because of the war. So in 1945 they came back with another version of this radio, and it was the 54BR for 1945. And they changed the last digits to 1501A and 1502A for the brown and ivory version. Now, on the 1945 version, they did some minor tweaks on the circuitry. The dial glass changed to one with larger numbers, and they also reintroduced the filament resistor, a smaller one. In the 1940 version, it was using a 50 ohm resistor. They eliminated it in the 1941 model year, and then they brought back a resistor, only it was a 33 ohm. So obviously they probably figured out that it was drawing a little bit too much. So in 1946 they really didn't do anything different. There was no additional model. But in 1947 they came up with the last version of this, and that was the 74BR-1501B and 1502B for brown and ivory. And that one had the same dial as the 1945. The only big difference, I mean it was a big difference, was a lot of the circuitry was modified. So the hard part about this whole process was trying to figure out what exactly did I have. You know, there were so many different variations, so I had to pretty much get the schematics for each year and compare them, and finally determine that this is either a 1940 or 1941 early model. With that being said, I now know what I need to do to restore this radio. So let's go ahead and open this thing up and get into a little bit more of how this thing was so unique at the time. It's really amazing some of the things they did in order to miniaturize it. Let's go ahead and get this chassis out of here. Okay, so that's the back. As you can see, this has some full-size tubes in it. It's pretty, I mean, I guess they were small for the time, sorta, but they're definitely bigger than tubes today. And these things have a couple of screws here, are pretty easy to get off. These just hold the chassis in place. Now, this thing was in pretty rough shape when I got it 11 years ago. I did clean it up a little bit as far as the chassis and the case here. So definitely don't have to do this during this restoration. But here you have the tube complement. What we've got is a 12SA7 right here that goes basically to the antenna circuit. And then you have the 12SQ7, which is the detector. 12SK7 over here, which is the IF amplifier. And then you have a 35Z5GT, which is the rectifier tube. And over here is your output tube, which is the, like I said before, the 35L6GT, and in other models that would be a 50L6GT. On top here we have your electrolytic capacitors, which those are going to have to be replaced, obviously. This is that, see, it's all warped. That's that face plate. Get that off of there. Okay. Underneath, as you can see, we've got our work cut out for us. Now, here's some of the uniqueness of this radio that I wanted to point out. Okay, here's the tuning. Now, as you can see, as I'm tuning it, there's some rods, and I don't know if you can see the one back here or not, but there's rods going in and out these two coils, and that's your antenna tuning section. Very, very unique. I really like that. Down here we have a lot of got some blown up capacitors here. You can see the ends blown out of that one, that one. The cord, of course, the electrical cord's cut off right there. So I'm going to have to replace 6 capacitors, which are here, 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 there. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those 6. So I'm going to go ahead and replace those first, and then we can go from there. On the back here you have this connection here. That's your antenna connection, and it hits the back of this plate when that's screwed in, and then you attach your antenna to here. So basically your antenna hits that capacitor right here before going into the antenna section. It's using this back plate as a capacitor. Okay, so in preparation for this restoration, I went ahead and got a power cord to replace the one that was cut off. I went ahead and drew out the capacitors and the values that I need, and I went ahead and identified them from the schematic. Alright, I went ahead and I got my electrolytics already. Now remember, the electrolytic capacitors are built into here, And what I've got is a 40 microfarad and a 20 microfarad built into that. So to replace it, what I picked up was I've got a 22 microfarad, and I'm going to go with a 47 microfarad for the 40. So that should work. I always like going a little higher if I don't have the nearest value. So that's it. That's my 6 capacitors that I need. Okay, just to make things a little simpler, what I've done is I've identified which capacitors I'm replacing. It's going to be C4, C6, C8 and C9 are those electrolytics. I've got a C10, C12, 14, and 15. So those are the capacitors, and this tells me where they're hooked to. Okay, so one of the issues that I ran into was C15, which is right here, is hooked between pin 3 and pin 4 on this tube socket, which is the output tube. It is not in the schematic hooked between 3 and 4. I checked the other schematics for the other models. It's not hooked between 3 and 4 on any of those. So I really started questioning what the validity is of the schematic, and then I went and found a couple of these online that showed the bottom here, and what I was able to determine is this capacitor is hooked between pin 3 and this first lug on R6. So I followed this, boom, 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 come down, over to here, up to here, and there it is. It's hooked to that lug on R6 on the schematic. So this is definitely wrong. I don't know if somebody tried to fix something and replaced it. I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm going to have to correct that. But other than that, all the rest of these are hooked up correctly. I did check that. And I'm going to go ahead and replace those. So what I did was I went ahead and drew some leads here to show where these capacitors were hooked. I'm going to the rheostat here. With these 2 capacitors, I'm going to that switch on this rheostat, which is from this capacitor. I've got these 2 pins here that these are hooked to. Same here. Every one of these capacitors, I know where they're hooked based on this little drawing. So I can go ahead and use that to do my recap, which will make things a lot easier. So now I can go ahead and cut these out and do my desoldering. Okay, boy, that one looks in rough shape. Alright, so I just got one left. That's that one to the power switch. Okay, so I'm working on trying to get this electrolytic out, and what I found out was I got a wire here that's in pretty bad shape. So as I've discovered, that wire that's busting apart here goes all the way into this can right here. So I've got some issues. I'm going to have to get to that can. I'm going to have to replace the wires in that can. So this is getting a little more complicated as we go along. So alright, so I've had to cut all these wires. I went ahead and marked where these colors go on my diagram for these transformers. So what I've got to do is I went ahead and unscrewed this. I already got the other one out. Just need to pull that through. There. Got them out. Now, as you can see, these things got pretty trashed. There we go. So I got to replace those wires. Wow. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and replace some wires here. I'm just going to use, I have some, I don't have any of the colors I need, but oh well. I marked on my sheet there which one's what, so I'll go ahead and start with this blue one. Alright. Okay, so there we go. So I am in the process of reinstalling this can. I got the wires fished up through here. It's tedious, to say the least. Alright, so should be able to route these wires where I need to. And then I'm going to get this other can installed on the other side and get those routed. Alright, so I've been able to secure the can. I've got my wires routed. Back over to here and here. I've got what used to be the brown wire routed over to here where it needs to be, and it's all wrapped on there. I haven't soldered them yet. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Okay, I'm going to leave that wire up for now, and let's get the other can installed. There we go. This one's a lot easier than the other one was. It's a nifty little tool here. You just mash it over the nut and it grabs it and gets it started for you. Alright. Okay, so I've got all these cables from that IF can routed and put in place. Got one here, here, one that goes back to there, and one that goes right there. So I need to solder those. I also, since I've got this mica capacitor back in place, I need to solder those wires that I took off earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all those soldered up real quick. The next little step here, I need to hook up this wire, I need to hook up this wire. These all went to that capacitor, that electrolytic capacitor, which was actually 2 capacitors. So what I've got is, there's this little circle here, and I had 2 little lugs here, and I had this lug here. This is the negative side of those 2 capacitors. This is the positive side of the 40 microfarad. This is the positive side of the 20 microfarad capacitor. So what I'm going to do is, I picked up one of these. I'm going to install that down here over that little nut and screw for that IF can. Now this is not hooked to anything. It's just a lug. But these 3 here, that leaves those 3 lugs standing. That's going to allow me to put these 2 filter capacitors, the 47 and the 20, right there, tie those to the negative and those to the positives, and then I can hook these wires to this instead of down here and pretty much create the same electrical connection. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-solder this. I'm going to put the capacitors on here and the resistor between them. By the way, I did go in and check all the resistors and made sure that every one of them was reading within specs, and they are. So I am good. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so here is my 2 electrolytic capacitors, the filter capacitors, and that resistor R3, all tied together on this little terminal strip. Alright, so that's going to get mounted right in here. That screw, and that be placed right in there. And then I can tie all these other wires to it. Okay, 2 more capacitors to go. So I'm totally recapped now. I've got all 6 capacitors. 1, 2, 3, 4 under here, 5 and 6. Got the two electrolytics. I went ahead and kind of went through it, made sure that all the wiring wasn't touching anything and none of the other components are touching. I measured all the resistors, made sure they were all in good shape, so I should be in good shape now to go ahead and install the power cord. Okay, so just got the power cord installed, the strain relief there. Got it hooked over here to the switch and pin 2 on the rectifier tube. So now we should kind of checked everything, made sure nothing's touching anything else. And let's go ahead and get a dim bulb tester and fire it up. Okay, so here comes the moment of truth. Always a scary moment. Got my dim bulb tester hooked up. Let's go ahead and fire this up. I don't see any light on the dim bulb tester. Are we doggone?
When it comes to Trump, always polled in the 90s when it came.
What's interesting is I don't have an antenna hooked up.
Here's the lineup. We got the Dorsey brothers, Tommy and Jim.
All right.
Classic five. When it comes to the issue, he's thinking about this.
Well, I got two stations without an antenna. I can't complain about that. Well, now we know it works. So there's a couple things I need to do here. The speaker itself has a couple little tears in it. It's just very slight, but I can cover that with some glue and help to hold that together. Okay, so what I'd like to do is a real quick speaker repair. You may not be able to see it in the camera, but there's a hairline crack that runs here, that way, and then there's a little spot over here that's busted through. And looks like right there too is a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a little bit of white glue with water. It's about a 1-to-1 ratio. So let me just squeeze out a little bit here. Good enough. Push that on there. Let it soak in. And what I'm going to try and do is get the back side, which I don't think you're going to be able to see too well from here. Let that dry and should be good to go. So while we're waiting on the glue to dry, I went ahead and printed up some labels for the rear there. Okay, now the reason why I know the dimensions of this thing is because the area on the back here, you can kind of see where the label was, so it's going to go right there. So there you have it. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was definitely an adventure for me because I've been wanting to restore this thing for, gosh, 11 years now. So finally got around to it, glad I did. And it was definitely a learning experience. I can't believe how compact everything was in this thing and how hard it was to get in there and do the work that needed to be done. But it's all done. I do want to do an alignment on it at some point, but for now it's good to go. I will probably just be putting it on my shelf and listening to it when I can. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please hit the like button. If you'd like to see more episodes like this, please hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. In the meantime, happy restorations, everybody. Hope you have a great day. Take care. Bye.